Okay, in this video we are going to look at probably the most common golf club repair you're going to run into, and that is a loose club head. So let's go fix it. Hi everyone, welcome to the Mobile Club Maker. I'm AJ. Thanks for watching the video today. I want to start out by saying welcome back to all our Mobile Club Maker subscribers. Thank you for your support as always. And if you're new to the channel, well, welcome. This is the place to be if you have questions or want to learn about golf club repair, golf club building, golf club design, golf club fitting, any of those. This is the community for you, so welcome. So what we're going to be looking at today is probably the most common golf club repair issue you're going to see, and that is a golf club head coming loose from the shaft. I've got a club here. The head is no longer epoxied tight to the shaft. I can twist the shaft and it moves around in the hosel. Hopefully, in most cases, you'll notice this before it gets to the point where the head just goes flying off the club down the fairway, and you'll notice some sort of little gap between the hosel of the club and the ferrule. And that's a good indication that there's an issue. So we're going to look at how to fix it, what you need to fix it, and go through the whole process. I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks also that you want to make sure you take care of to ensure that you get a good professional bond and a finished look at the end of it. Very simple though, very quick, so let's get started. Okay, now the first thing that you probably want to go ahead and check before you get further into this is make sure that it is actually the head that's loose and it's not just the ferrule, because I said this is the most common club repair, but it's probably actually the ferrule is the most common, which is just the ferrule itself maybe comes loose and starts sliding up and down the shaft a little. If it's just the ferrule and the head is still tightly attached to the shaft, well, you can basically just skip ahead, put a little bit of epoxy in that space between the ferrule and the hosel, squeeze them back together, wipe it clean, let it dry, and you're good to go. That's a very, very simple repair. That kind of thing happens often. I don't even know if I would call it so much a repair. That's just sort of a cosmetic little touch-up. However, in this case, this golf club, I can rotate the shaft, twist the shaft inside the head. So this is very clearly, not only is the ferrule able to slide around, which it is, but the head itself is able to move around. So this is something we obviously need to fix. The first thing we're going to have to do is we want to get the head and the shaft separated and then prepped, ready for a new epoxy application. So what I like to do, and if you have the ability to do so, if the ferrule is loose enough, we're going to move this ferrule and just kind of pull it down like that. If we can get that ferrule out of the way so we don't damage it or scratch it or scuff it or dent it, then we can keep using the same ferrule. That's going to save us a step. It also means we don't have to turn down the ferrule in the end, which is another step that we can, if we can avoid it, why not? So I've pulled this ferrule down. In some cases you may not be able to. In some cases, if you apply just a little bit of heat to it very gently, wrap it maybe in a little bit of a wet paper towel, you should be able to maybe slide it free and get enough clearance where you don't have to worry about it. In this case, this one slid right out. Next step. I can take these two club pieces apart, as you can see. They just come apart. But the next thing we need to do is actually clean out the hosel, and we need to clean the shaft. For that, I usually like to use a little bit of heat because it'll soften up the epoxy, make it a little easier to get rid of. So what I'm going to do is first use my torch. You could also use a heat gun. Run it over the hosel a little bit, and then just clean it out with a little wire brush. Okay, just heated it up for a few seconds. Then we're going to take our little wire brush and just kind of run it around inside. And you can see as I do this, you can see the residue of it sort of falling out. It's a lot easier to clean out epoxy if you heat it up first. If it's just dried epoxy at room temperature, it's going to be a lot harder to get out. You may have to drill it. But this way, heat it up a little bit. Very simple to clean out. The hosel's almost clean already. Okay, so this is almost completely finished. We'll have one more step for this part of the golf club we'll come back to in a minute. Now at this point we want to talk about the shaft. there's going to be two separate ways to go about dealing with a shaft, and that's going to depend on if you have a steel shaft or you have a graphite shaft. If you have a steel shaft, you can basically do most anything you want to. I would honestly go ahead and take that torch and heat it up, same way I did with the head, just a few seconds at the tip on a steel shaft, heat it up. It'll make it very simple to scrape off the old epoxy, get everything cleaned up very easily. Obviously, with a graphite shaft, that is not what you want to do, because putting that kind of heat from a torch directly on a graphite shaft, you have a very good chance that you're going to damage the shaft and make it unusable. So we don't want to use the torch. What I'm going to use in this case is the heat gun. I'm going to run the heat gun over this gently, only for a few seconds, 5-10 seconds, just to sort of soften up the epoxy a little bit. Then I'm going to go back with a utility knife. Take the utility knife and use it sort of to scrape away the epoxy residue. We're not using the knife as a blade. You don't want to run the blade like this because you'll cut into the graphite. You want to turn the blade towards you and push away from you. So you're just using it to scrape off the old material. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, as you can see, didn't do that very long, just a few seconds. But once you do that, you'll start, and you can see pieces of this flying up into the camera, but almost got it all off. And there we go. So you can see where we had that little sort of lip of epoxy, we've just scraped that all off using the back of the blade. Very simple. So this, again, we're very close to being able to go ahead and re-epoxy everything. There's two more steps, though, that we need to do with the shaft. The first one is we want to re-prep it. So a little bit of sandpaper, a little bit of medium grit sandpaper, and some gentle pressure. In this case, I'm just going to sort of pinch it between the sandpaper and just work it back and forth. Gently pinch it. Don't pinch it too tight. Also, when you're doing this, just kind of look where the epoxy and the shaft had been prepped previously. You can see it kind of goes down to right here. That's as far down as we want to go. You want to make sure you don't go too far down, so all of a sudden when you're all finished, you've got roughed up unpainted graphite shaft showing, or roughed up steel shaft showing on the other side of the ferrule. So make sure you don't over sand, over prep. Okay, here's a quick tip, something you want to make sure you do at this point in the process. This is mainly just for graphite. Obviously steel, it's not really going to be an issue. But after you've re-prepped the shaft and you've got it all nice and smooth, you really want to go and inspect the tip of the shaft and make sure there's no cracks or, dents or any sort of thing that might indicate that there's some sort of structural integrity issue. Obviously, if there's a crack in this shaft that was either caused by or caused from the head coming loose from the shaft, it's probably a good idea to not use that shaft anymore and get rid of it. Get yourself a new shaft. So you want to just go have a good look at it. Make sure you don't see any cracks, anything like that down at the tip, because that could indicate that this shaft is no good anymore and it would be dangerous to reinstall it. Okay, so the next thing we need to take care of is this tip. Ideally, when you have a new shaft, there's a hole in it, either steel or graphite. There's a little vent hole that runs all the way through the shaft. And that's important because when you're gluing a head to a shaft, the epoxy needs somewhere to go, somewhere to escape to when you put them together. If you don't have that vent hole, what can happen is you put the club together, you set it down, you come back later, and all of a sudden the hosel is now separated from the ferrule because the shaft has pushed itself back out of the hosel. So kind of like a champagne bottle, if you shake it up and the cork goes firing out, it's the same basic idea. So we want to make sure we have a vent hole for that pressure to escape through. So what we want to do next is I'm going to go ahead and just lock this in my vise and get my drill with a very small drill bit. I think we're using something like, I don't know, what is that, an eighth of an inch, 3/32 seconds. I'm going to put that down here when I go back and edit this video together, give you the exact measurement. Basically, you want something small enough that you're not going to be digging into the walls of the graphite, but big enough that it's not going to break and that gives you enough depth to get all the way through this little epoxy plug that's in here. Well, much like when you do a home renovation and you break through a wall, you never quite know what you're going to find. Same thing with golf clubs. I pulled the head on this and then went to drill out the shaft to get the epoxy out so we had a good vent hole. And turns out this had a little brass tip weight in it, which I didn't even notice. So that came out with the epoxy plug, part of the plug. So we went ahead and drilled a very small hole through this so it has a vent hole. Went ahead also and made sure that the epoxy that was in here was no longer stuck here, so we have a good vent. However, that did lead to a secondary issue, which is this shaft now has a bit of a rattle because the epoxy plug is actually stuck inside here. So I'm going to use a little trick that I found, actually got it from another video on YouTube from another club maker, which basically uses a old shaft on the end, small piece of shaft. This is a 355 tip, I believe, and a screwdriver head. We slide this over here, and I'll show you basically what we do is we're going to insert this into the vent hole on the back end of the grip, assuming it doesn't have a really hard cap on the back end of it. Pull out the screwdriver. That leaves this space there, and we can then just dump out the epoxy plug that's stuck in there. Okay, at this point, we're basically ready to re-glue the head to the shaft. You can pick whatever kind of epoxy you want to use for this. If you want to use a fast set epoxy, you can use that. I'm using a 24-hour epoxy in this case. Since this head has already come loose once, I want to make sure that it's less likely to happen again, so go ahead and use 24-hour epoxy. So we'll let that club sit 24 hours. Obviously, we're reusing the ferrule that was originally on it, so that means we don't have to deal with any turning down the ferrule or anything like that. So let it dry till it's completely cured and it's ready to go plate. You don't have to do anything else to it. Very simple. Okay, so there you go. For this sort of basic repair job, one of the most common repair jobs you're going to find, you can see it's a very simple process to go ahead and fix it yourself. Just took a couple simple tools, nothing fancy, a few minutes, and just paying attention and making sure you do things like make sure that vent hole is clear so that you don't get a buildup of pressure, and just make sure all your surfaces are nicely prepped so you have a good surface for that epoxy to bond to. But that's the whole thing. Very simple. It's a very simple job if you want to tackle it. So I recommend you give it a try. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please go down below, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave those down below. I always answer all the questions I get. And remember, this is all about you taking ownership of not only your golf game, but your golf equipment. Because at the end of the day, nobody knows more about your game than you. We'll see you next time.